Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. We're streaming on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel, the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. So do me a favor. Please I want you to like and subscribe. And then I want you to click that bell so that whenever we come up, we'll be able to, you know, let you know what we're doing. Okay, so I'm very, very excited about being with you today. Of course, the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page, and I think I've got Jack Gilroy down there too. He's going to be coming up as soon as I get his face on the camera. But everybody, let's talk today about what might be happening in Chicago at the DNC as we watch the police crackdowns with the students. And they have been violent. Make no mistake about it. We've had people from the University of Chicago, UNC Chapel Hill, et cetera, uh, over the past few days to tell us what these crackdowns have been like. And even Bryce Green, who's been a regular on this show, has been suspended, Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com, and Dr. John Quigley, and Jack Gilroy from Veterans for Peace. He's been suspended from Indiana University for leading a peaceful protest for not one, not two, not three, not four, but 5 years for the entirety of his PhD program. So we're following that. But when President Biden came to Chicago yesterday, he was greeted by a lot of protesters. And now the city council is shutting down more and more spaces where people will be able to demonstrate during the convention. Will this be 1968 all over again or 1968 plus? But let's talk about what's driving all of this. Even though corporate media they are telling us that Gaza is really not even a tertiary issue for people. I don't think that's true. It stirred up people all around the country. Indeed, it stirred up people all around the world. It has changed our conversation about how we deal with America's chief partner in the Middle East, Israel. Who thought that Americans would be growing in their criticism of our partner in that part of the world? And it is Dave DeCamp also having a very interesting and destabilizing effect, if you will, on many of the Arab governments because they have been installed in many instances by the West, and they're allowed to stay because the people have not rocked the boat. But there's a lot going on here, and let's be clear: this has gotten millions of Americans collectively out into the streets, and millions more all around the world. And so when President Biden had a really revealing conversation with Aaron Burnett of CNN yesterday, and it was quite lengthy, Dave DeCamp. We've got Jack Gilroy from Veterans for Peace, national field organizer. We're so glad to have this man with us, and Dr. John Quigley from Ohio State University, one of the leading scholars in international law. Dave DeCamp, you always, of course, from antiwar.com, you always bring me back to front. I always want to know just how you've processed all of this. Um, we were under the impression with this pause in shipments of munitions, bombs, if you will, to Israel. Some people might have thought, well, maybe we're making some progress here. And the president said, well, no, Rafah, we don't want them to go in there. But that's not quite true, Dave Camp. It seems that we're not being told the truth. What's going on? Because the headline of your piece from antiwar.com is Biden gave Netanyahu the green light to capture the Rafah crossing. What?
Yeah, so definitely some significant things have happened in the past week with this pause in a weapons shipment and what Biden said on Wednesday in that CNN interview that he's not going to give them these heavy bombs if they go into Rafah. But, the problem is that they've already gone into Rafah to some extent. What he seems to be saying is like if they launch a full scale invasion. But I think what a lot of people have missed is that earlier this week on Monday, Israel went into kind of the eastern part of Rafah and they went down to the border crossing into Egypt and they captured the border crossing. and that border crossing is still closed, and that was the biggest channel for aid deliveries, and it was the only border crossing that was accepting fuel, which of course is needed for hospitals and to deliver aid. And that's now been cut off for a few days. So this was kind of portrayed as Netanyahu defying Biden, but it came out that was based on a report from Axios that said Biden and Netanyahu held a phone call, before they launched that operation, and essentially Biden said, we're not going to stop you. It basically gave him the green light, and then the next day, the White House said publicly that that Israel told them, oh, it would be a limited operation. So basically, that the U.S. approved that. And this could be just as devastating as if they were launched a big invasion, because again, they're cutting off this aid. So now both of the southern border crossings have been closed. There's some aid kind of trickling in the north, but this is as we've seen with the World Food Program, which is headed by Cindy McCain now, which is kind of interesting, the widow of John McCain. And she said that according to what the World Food Program has seen on the ground, they believe that northern Gaza is already in a full-blown famine, and that it's moving south. And the situation for the millions of Palestinians in Rafah, which includes 600,000 children, is already really horrific. And now cutting off the aid, cutting off the fuel, is just going to make things worse. And we're still seeing Israeli artillery and other types of strikes on Rafah. There's fighting happening on the ground now. So there's a military operation going on in Rafah. So what is it? What does Biden mean, really? When is he going to cut them off from the bombs? And at the same time, he's saying that they're going to still give them long-term aid. And the $17 billion that was part of that big $95 billion monstrosity that we talked about last time I was on here, they're saying that they're going to give every penny. I saw the State Department press briefing today that Israel's going to get every penny of that. So, for us, critics of Biden supporting what Israel's doing in Gaza, I think it's pretty clear that this is kind of a PR move that comes after 7 months. At the same time, maybe it shows this pressure is working. And I think the response to this is to just, continue the pressure and hope that it leads to a big change. But right now, I mean, we're again, the aid is really vital, because it's not really clear how many people are actually starving to death on the ground. But the situation is that if just a few days of not having these supplies coming in could mean a lot of people will die.
Yeah, because the undercounting that Ralph Nader is talking about now, they said, because they've kind of slowed it down. It's like, it's 39,000 north, 34,000. You can't count all the people under the rubble. And people who are visiting Gaza now say that you smell the stench of death. They're just bodies that are decaying under the rubble. They haven't been able to get to them. What are we looking at, and what are they doing? You've had the Secretary of Defense who've, intoned, yes, we paused these munitions, and they have lent the impression that the United States is changing policy, Dave DeCamp, but it seems, in fact, they're not doing that at all. I think $1 billion more is going to Israel. It's just...
Yeah, it was the same day they announced this new $800 something million weapons package for Israel. They didn't say what's in it, so we don't know what they're giving them through that. But and another detail that's important is that the U.S. officials have said that Israel has enough munitions and bombs if they wanted to launch this full-scale invasion of Rafah. And there's obviously the risk, if Biden really doesn't want Netanyahu to do this, and Netanyahu might say, well, we're going to do it, and we'll deal with the consequences, because, they have what they need. It's like too little, too late, really. If he really wants to stop it, he should have thought about it much longer ago. And it's interesting, in that interview, he's acknowledging, he said something like, the consequence of us giving them these bombs has been civilians being killed. So
what is the end game here? Because last week online, Prime Minister Netanyahu gave us the view what they see Gaza looking like in 2035. They said it will be a metropolis on the Mediterranean. When he was at the UN just weeks before the terrible events of October the 7th, which is in the middle of all the terrible events that Palestinians have been enduring for three-quarters of a century. He had a map of the new Middle East and no Palestine. What is the end game? Because you tell the Palestinians to move here, you start dropping bombs where you tell them to move. I mean, what is this?
I mean, I think it's pretty clear what Netanyahu and his government, and not, because they kind of try to portray this as just Netanyahu, but, many people in the Israeli government, in the Israeli Knesset, want essentially to conquer Gaza,
Mhm.
and push all the Palestinians out, but Egypt's not going to take them in. So right now, I think the part of the goal is to just starve them out until they start, Egypt lets them in. And if that doesn't happen, then they're going to kill as many as they can. It's no secret that they want to reestablish the Jewish settlements in Gaza. The West Bank is the ultimate prize for, the settlers that are actually in the government now. Like these
Mhm.
people in the Netanyahu government, Bezalel Smotrich, he's literally in charge of the West Bank. Like, and he's a settler, and he has said explicitly for years that they want to kick out all the Palestinians out of the West Bank and annex it. So, but right now, Gaza is kind of, their kind of test run, I think, when it comes to, actually cleansing the area of the Palestinians. I think that is clearly what they want. But if they're going to be able to do that is the question.
Well, I think also part of the question that we're not asking is what's happening economically, because even with uh, the devastation that is being leveled at the Palestinian people, uh, Britain, the United States, and Israel are making money off the gas and the oil, which is off the coast of Gaza. I mean, those economic incentives we don't even discuss.
Mhm.
So, I mean, so where are we going with this? I mean, because you have the president, you have him saying one thing, but they're doing something else, and it's becoming so blatant, Dave. It's just it beggars belief every time I hear them speak about this. I can't believe anything I cannot believe anything that they're saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fair way that's the good mindset to have, or else, you'll just be fooled by what they say. But I
Mhm,
think, you mentioned the gas. I mean, the US just built this pier off of Gaza,
mhm.
which if you look at what they're saying they're saying it's to bring more aid into Gaza. But the US could have just pressured Israel to open more land crossings for that, which is like way more efficient than building a pier, which apparently cost the US $320 million to build. Um,
Dave,
so yeah, what's
they
the
did
point of that
not build
pier?
that pier to drop off some food that they've been dropping off from the sky.
Mhm.
Now we just need to stop it.
Yeah, I mean, it shows how absurd it is, right? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and there's also the possibility of them using that pier to get rid of the, ship off the Palestinians.
Where to?
That's the question. Now the U.S. is, it's one of those things. It's like the U.S. is looking at taking in Palestinian refugees from Gaza. Apparently, I think CBS News reported that.
Uh huh.
Um, and this is one of those things that, like, you hear that and you're like, well, at least they would get out of there. But then at the same time, that they're never going back, and that's Israel's goal, is to get them out of there. But then, it's like a double-edged sword, I think, for a lot of Palestinians there, that, it's their home, but at the same time, many of them would take the opportunity to escape. And I think that's what Israel's hoping for, that the countries, eventually cave and say, okay, we'll take in the refugees. And it's something they've said, that Israeli officials have said openly, that they think they should kick them, Western countries, in Europe and the US should take them.
So I guess so they can just so they can have free and open access to the gas and the oil. Because I keep driving that point home because the Palestinians, it has been estimated, have lost more than $50 billion in these oil explorations and exports and gas. I mean, it's a resource rich area, and I think we have to follow the money. But if you don't mind, I want to bring in the rest of the panel so they can react to what you're saying. Jack Gilroy, field director for Veterans for Peace. What do you make of this?
Well, what we have been doing, our focus, as much as we believe firmly that there is something going wrong nationwide, especially with a sense of compassion. Where is the compassion of American people other than the future of America, the Z generation?
Mhm.
We know what they have been doing and what they've been up to, and it's really wonderful for all of us to see that the kids who are 18 to 22 years of age seem to be the conscience that we assume America is about: fairness and not using violence, using diplomacy, all of this, and yet they have been castigated even by the president as being anti-Semitic. And it's curious that people like Norman Finkelstein, whose grandparents were executed, during the Holocaust, says that it's interesting how the Zionists have been able to make an industry out of the Holocaust. And they have been doing it now, of course, for 75 years or more. And so, what Veterans for Peace, knowing all that, we looked at what about law itself, since the United States likes to say it's a nation of laws. What we find out, it's a nation of amazing law breaking. And two distinguished attorneys, Terry Lodge, who has done great work in environmental and anti-nuke legislation laws over the years, an advocate. Uh, Terry Lodge began an investigation last January researching what specific laws could the United States be breaking. And he got into both national law and international law. And he went to Marjorie Cohen. As you know, Marjorie, formerly the president of the Lawyers
National,
Guild in the
right.
United States. Yeah. Marjorie looked over everything that Terry had spent, so many weeks studying. And she said, it looks like you're right on. So what we have come up with then is 6 broken laws that the United States has been breaking for many years. The one that most people seem to be familiar with is Senator Leahy's law, which you were not supposed to send. You cannot send legally weapons to a nation, to an entity, to a state that is known for its human rights violation. Well, it's almost sick humor to say, who would you be talking about when you think of Israel? The horrors that have been going on there. But even the Leahy law, they have found ways. There are loopholes in the Leahy law, and it is that you don't send $1 billion or more dollars. And so, what the United States has been doing, they were sending shipments of 100 million that eventually, of course, will end up in. There's no one shipment of $1 billion, so it's $100 million of equipment one day, and maybe 100 million a week later. So that is just one, the Leahy law. But we designed the letter, the Veterans for Peace letter, to be sent to all members of the United States Department of State, and it was endorsed as well by Josh. What's Josh's last name? The former director of the United States State Department, Josh Paul. So Josh said, he resigned back in last October because he said laws are being broken. And so the 6 laws then that we put into the one letter have been delivered to 17 of the 27, physically delivered to 17 of the 27 State Department offices in the United States. And we have struggled electronically to get them to the 170 other offices that are embassies around the world, and of course even more consulates around the world. And we have had some success with that. So we've even moved to the fact that industries are breaking the law by aiding and abetting the making, the designing, and making and transfer, exporting of weapons. So we started a campaign of trying to deliver the letter to particular industries. On tax day, for example, April 15th, a group of us from upstate New York traveled to Scranton, Pennsylvania, Joe Biden's hometown. And at Scranton, Pennsylvania, they make the shells for the most wanted munition of any, of the Ukrainians or the Israelis or whatever. And it's the 155 millimeter, about 2 foot tall, 155 millimeters in circumference. So they're made there by General Dynamics. And business is very good. They're working 7 days a week, although they shut us down when Mike Ferner, the director of, back last December, the director of Veterans for Peace, and myself laid down in front of the gate. They knew where they were coming, so they shut down the shift so that there would not be arrest or would not have any notoriety about what we were doing to try to point out what they were up to. But since then, we went down, as I said, on tax day. They would not let us deliver the letter. We left the letter in the gate. The guards were there. They would not accept the letter. Then we drove just a few miles up to another lawbreaker, Lockheed Martin, of course, the giant of all, 198 factories in the United States, 400 arms making factories around the world. But in Archbald, Pennsylvania, just a 15-minute drive from where the 155s are made, Lockheed Martin makes the paveway bombs, the 500-pound and 1,000-pound paveway bombs that are very often fired from QM9 Reaper drones. And so far, we don't know if the Reaper is being used in Gaza, but we do know that the 500 and 1,000-pound paveway bombs of Lockheed Martin are being used, as well as Hellfire missiles, which Hellfire missiles are made down near Disneyland, Disney World in Florida. But anyway, the point is that we eventually went to BAE, which is walking distance from where I live. BAE is the 5th or 6th largest manufacturer of weapons in the world. And they make the howitzer systems, the howitzers, the cannons, which are now mobile. They used to be simply on, two-wheeled cannons. Now they're on various kinds of vehicles. The design for the howitzers are made right here, a short distance away from here, to fire the 155s made in Scranton. So we had a letter. We tried to deliver the letter to the owner of the, or not the owner, but the plant manager. And they would not allow me to go in. Eventually, I made my way around security and talked to people inside on PA system, and they refused to send down the manager. I refused to leave, and I was arrested, and I have a trial coming up on that. But the point is, we did send certified mail. We sent the letter to them so that they do know. We're trying to get to the point that the workers should know that they're aiding and abetting, the killing of people, the breaking of homes and apartments, the destroying of hospitals, the tearing apart of those children that Santita was mentioning that are, under the rubble in Gaza today. They're part of that. We try to make that as graphic as possible. So we'll continue with this with other industries around the country. The 6 broken laws to let people know that there must be a better way that they can make a living rather than making weapons that, do not enhance life, but destroy life. So that's the nitty gritty that we've been up to. And I am not a law professor. I don't propose that, suppose that I would, or say that I'm an expert in law, but I do know that when I break laws, for example, criminal trespass, I have been in chains around the country in Atlanta Penitentiary and Pittsburgh, or rather Petersburg prison, various places for simple, nonviolent trespass on institutions, military and industrial institutions. So the real lawbreakers, of course, are the corporations that are getting extremely rich. Check the stock market. You'll see that Lockheed Martin and BAE and General Dynamics and Boeing and Raytheon, all of them are just, it's a bonanza. They're doing so well. So
They may have a group phone call, Mr. Gilroy, Dave DeCamp, and Professor Quigley at the beginning of this conflict. And they said, this is so tragic, but we're about to make a lot of money.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't make this stuff up. And I'm just trying. I mean, I mean, morally, of course, this is immoral. It is. But if you care about the troops and your eyes water every time there's an NFL game because you have, the great military display and all of that, and that's important. My mother's from a military family. I respect the military. I absolutely do, even as I advocate for peace, even though it's illegal to picket for peace. But if I want to go to war, I can do it. What is Dave, before we pivot to you, Professor Quigley, we have, and you, Jack Gilroy, we have troops all over the world. And they are, many of them, well, like we have these troops in Niger. Niger has told us to leave. We're still there. They're not able to get their medicine, their mail, and they're saying, oh my goodness, I can't get my medicine. I can't get my mail. I'm like, but they told you to go. Get out. These people, they want you out. It's not safe. And increasingly, I think, I don't even think we know. I think it's hubris. That's all. I can only chalk it up to that. It's an excessive pride and arrogance when you think you can do anything to anybody, and that is not true. I mean, Dave, we are being viewed all around the world as the ugly American writ large. This is a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Niger. That situation is really crazy. I mean, they told the U.S. to leave, and they've been kind of pretending like they haven't been told to leave. And they say, "Oh, we're still in talks with them." And then you hear from the soldiers who were there, who, like you said, they say they're stuck. I mean, they were supposed to be relieved about a month ago,
Yeah.
and they're not getting medicine, according to some soldiers who spoke with. I think it was Matt Gates who did like a report on it. And there's Russian troops now at one of the U.S. bases in Niger. I mean, it's really, they're really putting them in danger. For what? Because they have a drone base there that they don't want to give up. I mean, that's all it really comes down to. And the money, that it's a huge hub that they built, like, I think 6 years ago, and they don't want to give it up. So they don't care if they're putting those guys in danger who are there.
We did that in Afghanistan. They said, no, August 31st, out of here. We
Mhm.
said, well, we want a few more days. They said, August 31st. I said, did you not hear them? You have no control over this country. And I see, I mean, and we're breaking all of these international laws. Professor John Quigley, um, what I mean, and we're trying to block. If correct me if I'm wrong, Dave DeCamp. We are trying to stop the ICC from prosecuting. Is it Netanyahu and his cabinet, Dave DeCamp?
Yeah, Netanyahu and the other top Israeli officials.
What's happening with that?
Well, I know the latest thing. I don't really know where the ICC's at, if they're going to like issue warrants anytime soon. But did you see that letter that it was 12 Republican senators, including Mitch McConnell, sent to the ICC? I
Yes.
mean, that was like a mobster threat. Like, it was really crazy.
You,
Um,
you better not.
yeah,
If you
consider
do,
this.
we're gonna. I said, what are you gonna do?
Yeah. And they mentioned I forget what it's called. It's like the American Service Protection Act or something. It's basically a bill that George W. Bush signed into law that essentially authorized the use of force to like free any U.S. or allied personnel if they're detained by the ICC. And they mentioned that in the letter. I mean, and they sanctions and everything. So yeah, that's what. And just a year ago, the U.S. backed the ICC issuing a warrant for Putin. So it just shows the hypocrisy is just. And the rest of the world sees that, and it's just really unbelievable.
Now, Professor Quigley, talk to me. Talk to us. What is this? Jack Gilroy, you could have fooled me. Sounded like a lawyer to me. But I mean, the great thing about us, well, we're supposed to be able to look this stuff up and find out about it. We're supposed to find out if we're breaking laws, and we should know what the laws are. Dr. Quigley, what are we supposed to do when we're breaking all of these laws? I mean, you've got Anthony Blinken, who's traveling in and out of these places. I would be very reluctant to do all of this traveling, Jack Gilroy and Dave DeCamp. I've traveled around the world with Reverend Jesse Jackson. He's been given space because of what he represents and because of his politics, which are very progressive. But these people are not playing with us increasingly. And don't think you can't get taken hostage. He's had to go get enough people out who we would not. Who, Jack Gilroy, we have left our soldiers just to stay, Dave DeCamp. We just left them. And we were not going to try and negotiate. We do it all the time. Professor Quigley, what are we looking at? I mean, Biden is saying one thing, but he's clearly doing another. Oh, well, hold on. Let me make sure that you are unmuted. Professor Quigley?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on what Jack Gilroy said, that he may not be a lawyer, but next time I need a lawyer, I'm going to get in touch with him, I think. But because, he was mentioning the domestic laws that are being broken, and he mentioned just briefly that international laws as well. And he's spot on saying that this is being raised now by Nicaragua in the case that's filed against Germany in the International Court of Justice for providing armaments to Israel that facilitate the commission of genocide. And the court issued an order in which it said that countries have to be careful when they give armaments to Israel, that there is a norm of international law that applies here. When you give arms to someone who is using them unlawfully, you are in the wrong yourself. And that's what Nicaragua is trying to say in its case against Germany. But it's hard to figure out exactly what Mr. Biden is up to. I think he likes to be on both sides of an issue at the same time. I think that's kind of his modus operandi, because he gave this speech on anti-Semitism at the Holocaust Museum just the day before he said that we would pause the delivery of arms, the 500-pound bombs and the 2,000-pound bombs. But at the same time, we're not giving money to the UN Relief and Works Agency, which is crazy. That would be the easiest thing Biden could do to at least a bit ameliorate the situation in Gaza, because that is the only agency that has the infrastructure to distribute aid in Gaza. And as Dave DeCamp was saying, bringing some supplies in by boat in rather small quantities isn't going to make that much difference, particularly since there's not a way to distribute those safely. And UNRWA not only is under siege from the United States for its refusal to provide funding, it's also under siege in Jerusalem. Within the last 3 hours, fires have broken out around the headquarters of UNRWA in Jerusalem, and there is a mob of Israelis shouting, "Burn the United Nations." The police and fire authorities took quite a long time to respond to calls to come and deal with it. The UNRWA staff was out there with hoses trying to put out the fires themselves. These are fires set not of the actual building, the headquarters, but in the trees right around the building. So you can see there's video being circulated now on social media that shows the smoke around the building. And so this kind of thing is being supported by the a good segment of the population in Jerusalem, um, and not much is being done by the Israeli government. As far as the long-term strategy, you were raising that before. That is, what does the Israeli government hope to achieve? Is it to get the Palestinians out of Gaza? Is it something else? And I think getting them out is part of what is in their minds. That they figure that if they make it really horrible, so that the alternative is that people will die, that the Gazans themselves will demand to be let through to Egypt or somewhere else. But the starvation that is being promoted, and here the UN Special Rapporteur on Food has been quite vocal in saying that this is how he assesses the Israeli aim in Gaza, is to kill, a slow death kind of kill, by depriving the population of the means of sustenance, depriving them of medical care, so that people that catch cold, something very treatable, are going to be deprived of medical care, and you'll have people dying in that way. So it'll be deaths that won't immediately be attributable to the Israeli government, but will be quite certain nonetheless. Which is why I've been saying since October that I thought genocide was started and was being actually committed in violation of the Genocide Convention, beginning in the middle of October with the evacuation orders, which had the clear consequence that population was going to be killed. It was obvious. And that constitutes genocide. Even if you don't have a single person actually dying, if you look at the Genocide Convention and read it carefully, genocide is committed when you create conditions of life that are likely to bring about the destruction of a population group or part of a population group. And when the IDF ordered people out of the northern part of Gaza, it was quite obvious that those people had nowhere to go, that they were not going to be provided for, and that you would have substantial deaths.
Dave DeCamp, where are we going with all of this? I mean, I don't think that, and Jack Gilroy, I don't think that the student protesters, I don't think that that's going anywhere. And even as we watch the encampments broken up rather violently, that just happened here in Chicago at the University of Chicago just a couple of days ago. And the police are becoming more and more aggressive with these students. And they're charging anti-Semitism. Many of the leaders of this movement, I think I can call it that, because it seems they're growing in strength. They're Jewish, they're Palestinian, they're Black. The Black and the Palestinian students are the ones who are being treated most harshly. As I mentioned at the top of the show, Bryce Green, young African American, brilliant, just testified at the United Nations as a respected expert on the issue of Ukraine. He's been banned from campus. Now they're not going to give him his money back. I don't know how he's supposed to go to school, go to class, but they're not letting him on the campus. And he described where he was arrested in the middle of the common space on the yard. When we go to college, that's what we see. He said there was a sniper on the building. These people were basically in military gear. Yes, with guns, trained on people who didn't have them. I mean, Dave, where is all of this going? Because I see the deceit. I see more and more deceit all the time. Every time I read one of your stories, I'm like, but they told us this, and the opposite is happening.
Yeah. I didn't know that about Bryce because I know him. I knew he was arrested. I didn't realize he was actually suspended for a few years.
Banned for, that's the length of his PhD program,
Wow.
Jack Gilroy and Professor Quigley. That just happened about a week ago.
Wow.
And so we're trying to, Reverend Jesse Jackson is going to give him a letter of support. And so we need to talk about that because and in fact, they got the police on the police scanner because Jack Gilroy and Professor Quigley, this is what's happening to these activists. They scanned the IDs of the demonstrators at Columbia University. Well, they described him before they arrested him. So the police went to find him on the Indiana University campus. This is what we're dealing with. So
Wow.
all of this, and it's not, and Bryce is literally across the street from campus. He can't go into campus. He can't do any of that, but he is there still and still organizing politically and all of that. But and we're now moving toward the convention season, particularly in Chicago. We're going to be talking about that in the next hour, where people are really, when President Biden was here, Mr. Gilroy and Professor Quigley yesterday, he met a lot of protesters. And I don't know where that energy is going to go this summer because the city council is really, much of Chicago is going to be off limits to the protesters. They will not be able to get within the perimeter of the center where they're going to actually have the convention itself. So what are we supposed to do with this information? President Biden is saying one thing, he's doing something else.
Yeah, it's tough to know how everything's going to play out. It's a long time from now until November at this point, and I think it's going to be really embarrassing for Biden that all of his campaign events and the convention and everything, there's definitely going to be lots of protesters showing up. So it's just tough to know how things like, what is Israel going to do next? Are they just going to continue, starving them out and launching strikes? Are they going to go for the full-blown invasion of Rafah and just deal with the consequences after that? One thing that you see that what Biden did by saying what he said the other day is he got all the Republicans all worked up, except for there's only one I could think of. It's Thomas Massey in Kentucky who votes against funding for Israel. I can't really think of another Republican who does it. He does it in principle that he's against the, foreign military aid. But anyway, you see
but
they're
you
getting
have Rand Paul asking questions.
Yeah.
You do.
Rand Paul can be good.
And for what it's worth, Marjorie Taylor Greene will ask some questions. You don't have to like these people. I think one of the mistakes that we make, Mr. Gilroy and Professor Quigley, and Dave DeCamp, I will certainly start with you, but I'd like to open it to everybody else. You have some Republicans with whom at least we're on the same page with them on this issue. We might be coming at it from different directions, but we are. And I think it's politically unwise not to be in league with them, at least on this issue. The uncommitted vote in Wisconsin was not 48,000 strong. That's on the Democratic side. If you add the 12,000 plus Republicans, that's 60,000 votes.
Yeah, that's interesting. And that's kind of our whole thing at antiwar.com. We're like a single issue project. We're libertarian, the staff mostly, and we work with people from across the political spectrum, especially when it comes to the issue of war and just kind of intervention in general. But it's unfortunate because it seemed like with Ukraine, like there was kind of some growing opposition to that on the Republican side. Democrats were horrible. Still are on that war.
Yeah.
And then now with Gaza, it's just like all that's out the window. It's they have to fund this horrific slaughter of children no matter what. There's a bill. You know who Andy Ogles is? He's a congressman from Tennessee. He introduced a bill yesterday that says basically if you're arrested on a college campus for protesting, you should be sent to Gaza.
Absolutely.
And this is their response. And what he says in his statement on it is, I bet they won't last more than a day in Gaza, basically saying he expects them to be killed or something. This is his response to college protesters. It's
Jack,
just completely insane.
it is insane. I mean, it's unhinged. Jack Gilroy, what do you say to that? I mean, and
Well,
members of Congress who said, well, everybody over there needs to be killed. I'm like, are you?
yeah, it just seems a dramatic change. Recently, it was pointed out that in 1933, 34, students were following Hitler's call to ban books by invading libraries and taking out books, especially Jewish authors, but even Mark Twain and Hemingway, etc., burning them in the and these were students throughout Germany. And here, and we just looked aghast at all that. Now here we're upset because students are saying, stop the burning of children in Gaza, stop the destruction of people. And the president of the United States, gets on and tells people it's basically anti-Semitism. I just think that the power of AIPAC has been just so overwhelming in Congress that they have allowed Netanyahu and the Zionists to just simply be the tail wagging the dog, and the threat to and I've seen them operating in Washington D.C. because I've done a fair amount of lobbying there over the years, but they have the power. They have the threat that we know that they have used in the past on American politicians, and they are the heart of this 75 years of indoctrination, and they have not. We're talking about in the United States, but the professor here was just mentioning about what is going on in Gaza, in Jerusalem right now. The majority, so many of the Israeli people have been indoctrinated as well. They have been the capture of the Israeli mind and the American mind in support of Zionist plans, and whether it's genocide or total removal of all people in the West Bank as well as in Gaza, whatever it is, they seem to be pretty much in support of it, at least from what Haraz and the other news channels that we are getting out of Israel. But here in the United States, people like Norman Finkelstein, professor, over the years, graduate of Princeton, he has been kicked out of schools such as even Notre Dame because he was telling the truth about Israel. He's on internet interviews, but you won't find the New York Times or the New Yorker or the Atlantic or Foreign Affairs or anyone listening to him, because he has spent his whole life studying the Zionists and what they have been able to do to capture the American mind and the mind of Israelis. So that's a hard. What do I think? I think it's almost an impossibility. But I do look at the Z generation again as the one link to bring us home. And but I'm afraid that it's getting it's maybe too late with what's going on in the Ukraine and with Israel with its known 200 nuclear weapons. So that's another law that we're breaking, by the way. We're not supposed to send weapons to a country that has nuclear weapons if they're not a member of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And of course, everyone knows, Colin Powell even said that they probably had 200 nuclear weapons. But that's all under the rug kind of stuff that is just, it drives us crazy that they have been able to get away with this.
Dr. Quigley, before we go, is there anything that can be done? Because unchecked power, Jack Gilroy, Dave DeCamp, you cannot have, no one can have power that is unchecked. Dr. Quigley.
Yeah, well, in theory, the United Nations is supposed to be dealing with all this, but and we're seeing that there's pushback now against the United States for blocking the United Nations from doing anything meaningful, and that's going to come up again later today. Actually, in New York, there's going to be a vote in the General Assembly asking the Security Council to reconsider its vote where it almost voted Palestine to membership, but the United States vetoed. So the General Assembly is asking the Security Council to reconsider, and at the same time, the resolution that's being voted on will increase the status of Palestine at the United Nations to make it as close to membership as you possibly can be without actually calling it membership. And I suspect the United States will be opposing that. But of course, in the General Assembly, it doesn't have a veto. But regardless of the actual significance of all that, it shows the extent to which the United States is being seen around the world as an obstacle to peace. This resolution, the preamble to it, the preamble to the resolution talks about the fact that the Security Council wanted to admit Palestine to membership except for one country, and that's just not an acceptable way to run the United Nations, where one country can stand in the way of what everyone else wants to do.
Dave DeCamp, why don't you wrap things up for us in about a minute or so? Oh, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. So you asked me earlier what I think is kind of going to happen, and again, it's tough to say, but I think when I mentioned the Republicans before, the point I wanted to make is that this is kind of what they're going to be running on now. I think is Biden is abandoned Israel. We've seen Trump say that. That's going to become a big part of the campaign, I think, which is unfortunate because Netanyahu, they're going to see that and understand that if they go for this big invasion of Rafah, or if he decides to kind of just buy time until November, that, he's going to have a much more friendly American government. I mean, and also it's important to note that Biden has not abandoned Israel. He's given them everything they want up to right now, but the question is if that's a serious threat that he's making or not.
But he's given them everything. I mean, he said to Netanyahu, they agreed. You can breach the Rafah crossing. Go.
Yeah, and it's just after saying that they claiming for so long that they don't want Israel to restrict aid, and then approving an operation like that really goes to show how you can't trust anything that they say.
Nothing. We'll build a pier so you can get some food. Oh, but that's where we collect the gas and the oil. Oh, come on. This is terrible. And people are dying, and the global South is uniting. They are standing, Jack Gilroy, and that's most of the world. They're coming up with a new currency. It's a whole new world order, but it's not the world order that we thought was coming. It's here. So Dave DeCamp of antiwar.com. I'm so glad that you work with people across platforms, because this is not a partisan issue. It's a people issue. Mm-hmm. We need to deal with that. And I'm going to work with people who want peace. Whatever label you want, you can have it. I'm talking about peace. That's where I am. And with peace comes justice and liberty and freedom and all of those things. Otherwise, you just have quiet, waiting for a riot. Jack Gilroy, thank you for all the work that you've done down through the years. I can't wait to have you back. See, I told you could be on camera. I told you. And then Professor John Quigley, thank you all for the work that you have been doing down through the years. Can't wait to have you back. My love to all those babies, Dave DeCamp.
Thanks.
Thank you, Santita.
Absolutely. Stay tuned for the second hour. We're going to talk about Chicago. Will we be rocking and rolling in the summer? Wow. If yesterday's any indication, if this week's the breaking up of the encampment at the University of Chicago, if it's any indication, if Columbia, UNC Chapel Hill, I don't know, everybody. I'm not asking for it. It doesn't have to happen. But this is unsettling. Back with more of the Santita Jackson Show on the other side of the break. God bless. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
God
Thanks
bless.
again.
All
Take
right.
it easy. I
Thank
gotta
you.
run.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
You're right.
Okay.